Hello everyone and welcome to this video where we're going to be adding a feature that's going to be implemented in all of my ships for sure moving forward, and possibly I'll go back and retrofit my ships that I've built in the past. This is a feature that's been requested and it's something that makes sense because everyone hates when they fall off the ship and the ship goes on without you. Obviously if you're playing in multiplayer or in real life you'd have a crew that can stop the ship, but if you're in single player and your ship escapes you, you need a tether system. So follow along as we build a tether system that's going to prevent us from losing control of the ship and having it run away from us. Obviously now the ship is under power, there is no one at the helm, it's just us. And if I go back here and fall off, good luck getting back on. There it goes without me. This is one of the worst feelings in the game, especially if you're playing in single player, especially in career mode. And off your ship goes and you are stuck and there's pretty much no way to get back on. Obviously you can use no clipping, but let's say for the sake of realism you don't, and if you're in single player where that isn't allowed, so let's build a tether. Now there could be a variety of tethers that exist or can be implemented. You can make a system on a timer where you pretty much have to press a button every 30 seconds, otherwise the ship stops, and in this case you'd be able to swim and catch up to it. But I want something that doesn't have the ship go on without us. So the obvious thing would be to use the player sensor. Okay, and with the player sensor, it has a range of up to 10 meters. So if we measure out 10 meters from this point, I'm gonna use green. 10 meters is like past the deck. So imagine a circle of this range, and obviously back here it is up to about there. So with this problem, or with this solution, if it's just a simple throttle, this is what I call the poor man's solution, or just the not well thought out solution. You'd put this right here. So let's give it a shot. Let's just delete all this stuff. I'm gonna embed it into the deck itself because I want to make sure that it is actually able to function, because I want to set it not to circumference or sphere but to hemisphere. And detect all, I mean in this case detect players, radius of 10, and it'll be a simple microcontroller that we add. So I have to go and find the throttle path. This is a bit more difficult in a ship that's this size with this many processes, but if we can find the throttle, which is right here, okay, perfect. So this throttle or throttle limiter is where we're going to add on the next bit. I'm going to go to my empty microcontroller. So what we need obviously is a couple things. We need throttle in, we need throttle out. So that's two right off the bat. Throttle in, throttle out. And we need that player sensor. So it's an input from the player sensor. So throttle out, throttle in. And if we go into the logic, pretty much our throttle in is good to go until it's not. Now obviously this doesn't work because that means there has to be a player out there at all times. So in this case you'd have an on and off button. So this is the toggle button, and you'd pretty much press it when you're out on the deck, and as long as your player is found or is on the deck, you are going to stop the ship. So quite simple really. Or sorry, if you're on the deck, you don't stop the ship. If you're off the deck, you stop the ship. So throttle in is going to be on our... So first let's check. So player sensor means we're up there and the button's on. If we're up there and the button is on, that means we have to have this being on the on. Meaning if we fall off the ship or if we go inside, so that's one of the downsides. If we go inside or if we fall off, the ship will go to this value and it will turn off. So as long as we're toggled and on the deck, it is on. This is as easy as it gets, really. So what you have to do now is we'll have a little post stub here This isn't intended to look pretty, it's just intended to get the point across. So here's our toggle on button. So as long as the toggle is on and as long as our player sensor detects us, it's right up there somewhere, right here, then we can keep the ship going. So throttle out, and lastly we have to replace all of these with this. So it's gonna be this, 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 and there's one over here, and there's the throttle down in the clutch assembly. You just have to find it, throttle input. Okay, that should be all of them now. So if I go to this one, it's gonna have a throttle out, and of course it does go to some other ones up there, which I'll have to nitpick and discover, but we could easily do that by just being smart with our selection tool. There you go. So now technically they're all off, or all the throttle outs are all going here, and it's going to this. So that should be good to go. Do have to add electric to the button. Just gonna throw it onto any circuit really. And let's take a shot at testing it out and seeing what happens. Go up to the bridge. Now I know I could use no clipping, but I do enjoy using all the stairs. Okay, turn it on. And something is off. So actually, the button is not on, but we're not wanting to go. Well, there's a fundamental flaw with this. It only works if the player is detected and if the toggle is out. So if neither of these two things happen, then actually the button does not function. So that's a big mistake on my part. Let's fix it. And how we're going to fix it is by using a not sign. So if a player is not detected and the button is on, then we actually want to stop the ship. So let's try that. So what happened is it didn't work because of the logic didn't make sense, but now we're always giving it throttle out, except if these two things happen, then we stop it. So that should actually be working. So I've started up the ship. Now we actually do have our throttle working from here, which is good. And now, if I go to fall off, but if I turn on the button first, we're still going, okay? That's good. So we have ourselves detected here, but if I go and fall off, the ship stops. Okay? The only problem with this is if we get too close, the ship may start up again. Like for example, if I fall off the side here, it may not detect that I've actually fallen off, especially if the deck is low to the water. For example, if we're loaded or if there's waves happening or something, and this player sensor, which is using currently the hemisphere mode, detects that I'm just approaching the ship, it may cause a bit of a problem. And how we're going to sort that out is by adding a different mechanism that actually lets you fall overboard and it'll cut the engines. So for this, I want to use an instrument panel, and I want to have a couple things. Okay, I'm going to put the button, which is going to be a push button. I'm going to put an indicator, which is going to tell us the system is armed, and I'm going to put an indicator that tells us there's a man overboard. I'm going to put it under here so it's all a little nicer, and that one's going to be 3. So arm tether, so it'll look just like this. So arm deck tether, or arm player deck tether, player deck tether armed, and man overboard, or player overboard. So we'll have this system on. Obviously we can color code it, and that's the basis of what we're going to put into our system here. Now in our system here, we do have this thing being tripped up by what's happening with the player sensor. In this case, we're going to revamp it actually, because I want to do it a little bit different. So first of all, we don't need this toggle because now we have a whole indicator system or composite system. So for the composite system, it's going to have both composite in and composite out. And we'll deal with that in a second here. But first, what I want to do is, and presumably on a bigger ship, there's going to be mini deck sensors. So we can also have, you know, player sensor 1, player sensor 2, etc., etc. So that is something else to consider. But throttle in, throttle out stays. And obviously this indicator panel or control panel, I'm going to call it instrument 1 because I may add more of them on the deck. So same thing, player sensor 1 and player sensor 2. Really, it's either or, and in fact, it may be the best or most worthwhile to just put it as a function feature and have, you know, a bunch of them. Obviously not the number one, but the other one. And you'd put 1 and you'd put 2 and you'd put as many as you have. So if we look up at the operators, we see that OR is the straight line. So we'd put X and or X or this or this or this. And you can have all of them. And then as you have different sensors, they will come into play. But any of them gets tripped and this system will stop. So with this system now, and obviously the throttles in and throttles out will remain up there. We're going to touch on them later. So we have the instrument panel and we have to put the composite read on off. So our number 1 channel, which is the on and off button. But remember, it's a push. So because it's a push button, we actually have to have an SR latch. So if you push the button, it sets the latch. And that then acts as the system. So we may actually now have to go back into our world and set a button here to disarm, or rather deactivate, the player tether. So if you fall off the ship, you get back on the ship, you're going to push this button here to deactivate the system. And that's number 3, or channel number 3. Just going to move everything up a little bit, make ourselves some space. Have to go find this, and what I'll do is make it here to say channel 3. In this case now, the channel 3 really will reset this latch, and it also has to be just a push button. There's no need for it to be a toggle. Push button. Fantastic. All right. Now, back to the rest of it. So if these guys are tripped up, I want it to stop the ship indefinitely. So now it has the SR latch. So it no longer turns back on once we get on the ship. It'll physically flip the switch. It becomes latched. And now until we press the reset button, it is pretty much not able to go anywhere. The rest of it, I presume, is going to be the same. It's just if the player is detected in any of these zones, we're good to go. But if the player is not detected in any one of these zones, and if we are latched onto this situation here, meaning the button has been pressed, now this is going to cause the switch to flip and it will stop the ship. Okay, so just like that. So really what we're telling it is, in normal operation, you're good to go, you're good to keep going. But in the case of if the system is on and someone is not sensed, then we actually flip this and stop the ship. The last thing we need to do is the instrument panel indicators, and for that we go to composite. We're going to go to composite right, and pretty much we need to put 2 of them. I may need to go in and change the numbering system, because it's a little easier if this is 1, this is 2, and then 3 is if it's armed, and 4 is if man overboard. So now with that in mind, if we go back in here, we can set this to be 2, and then this one here will make it start at channel 3, and there's 2 of them. So that's channel 3 and that's channel 4. So channel 3 is system is armed, meaning the button is pressed and presumably someone is on the deck. Now technically it should be just when the button is pressed. And maybe that's actually better, because the button remains pressed regardless of if you're on the deck or not, if you fell into the water, or if you've walked into the cabin. Because what if you've just walked in to the ship and then it becomes false, or rather man overboard, if it finds out that someone has indeed fallen off, meaning this has happened. So this is on, someone's fallen off, and that's when this thing actually gets flipped to become on. So that's right here. So quite simple in the microcontroller sense. Let's go and connect everything up and give it a shot. So we kept all of our throttle outs, which is nice. We kept our throttle in. We didn't have to go revamp them. Now we have the player sensor 1, which is still the right thing, but now the button is no longer applicable. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete that. Now there is no second sensor, so that really doesn't matter for us right now, but we can go and add this here. Now, an ideal position to put your controllers or your player sensors would be somewhere where they can actually, where you can cover a wide range of the ship, presumably all the decks. So like in this case now where I put it, that actually covers the whole back end of the ship. I'd probably want to put one maybe right up here. And the reason I'm doing that is because it's going to now detect where the people are. And if you go up the stairs, or if you go wherever, you'll be still in its range. Now where you're not in the range, actually, I just select the wrong one. There we go. So that's all connected up. The composites are connected up. We just have to give electrical power to this. So just looking at this ship, there's a lot of decks. So that one that's in the midships here, it probably detects a range like right here. You'd most likely need one also in the front, unless you want to trip the system. So this, I feel on a ship even this size, you'd probably need 4 sensors, let's call it. Realistically, 1, 2, 3, 4. So one here near the hot tub, and one back in the very front of the ship. That way, if you fall off, no matter what, it's going to stop the ship. Obviously, if you go into the ship, that's going to also trip the system. And yes, I can make something that can stop the tether. For example, it can trip and disable the SR latch if it detects you in this region. But because there's several places you can actually walk into, for example, you can walk in here, you can walk in here, you can walk into the bridge, you can walk into the crane cabin. So there's really there's 4 areas you can walk into, probably 5, because you'd have to have another sensor in the front of the ship here in this region. So there's 5 areas. So this ends up being a fairly big microcontroller with all these different areas. And I think there's no practical purpose of it, because what I envision for this microcontroller, we flooded something. So what I envision for this microcontroller is it would be up on a post somewhere by the door, maybe like right here, or maybe even somewhere obvious like right here, and it's kind of like a storm button. And if the ship is going through really crazy waves, or if you think you have a chance of falling off, you turn that controller on, and if you fall off, it stops you. But if it's just business as usual, most of the time you probably will not need that on. We're going to give it power for the first time here. So here we go. We're giving it throttle. And now let's go take a look on the rear deck and see what it looks like and see what happens. Okay, we've got our button here. And now the system is armed. Fantastic. So that's already working properly. Now what happens if we fall overboard? That is exactly what we wanted. The ship stops. We can board back on and we'll find that the ship doesn't just start going crazy, or rather that it does. Interesting. So something did not work properly here. I reset the system, but this still has the throttle 100%. So the problem is coming from this end, because as soon as we get back on the deck, this latch is on, this is no longer a thing, and it just flips this back. So we have to find a way to now actually stop the system. And the way I think it'll happen is, instead of this, it may just reset the whole thing, or an easier, more practical application would be to use an SR latch right here also that will pulse this. It'll set the latch. I'm going to put it here. So if this happens, then there's actually a latch goes on, meaning if someone is no longer detected. So if they're not detected, a latch goes on, and that's what we're going to put here in this system. And here we're going to put that the system is armed. Now, if the system is armed and this latch is enabled or activated, then you flip these guys. Now, how to reset this, you have to press the reset button, and that pretty much just resets all your latches, and you're good to go after that. So we're going to actually label that a little differently. This button here is not, well, it's, yeah, deactivate. It's not reset, it's deactivate. That's exactly what we had. So deactivate meaning business as usual. Now let's give that a shot. So here we are going. Now right away it's detecting man overboard. So something is off there. But now I enabled it, and now it's on. So if I fall off now, it stops. And presumably now it's going to have the red indicator light on. Man overboard. You reset the system, and the ship goes back to going because it is off. Now I just have to find out why on earth it was starting off with man overboard as the basis. First things first, I do have to put a push button here because I don't want it to constantly be on. So once it detects that there's no longer a player, it goes into push mode and it pushes that on. So like a pulse. Okay. And then secondly, the reason why it was detecting that is because obviously the first thing that this thing did is sense, yeah, no one's on the deck. So I'm going to say man overboard. Even though realistically there was no man overboard, there was just not anyone there to begin with. So it won't come down to this one here, but it'll come from this one here. So when this is actually tripped, that's when you have your man overboard. One other thing I have to add is if I leave it like this, it's gonna become set with man overboard, or because there's not going to be anyone when the ship spawns. So really, this gets set when two things happen. It gets set when this guy gets set, so I have to make sure that this one is also on. So let's add another and. So if we're doing this and this, that's when it sets. And now that it's set, it now depends on this being set in order for these things to happen. Spawn the ship up, nothing is registering, so that is excellent. Now if we go and test the system out, okay, everything's off. It's armed. Now we can go about the deck doing things. we should have access to all of the deck, because at any given time we're detected, but if we fall off, it stops. That is looking good. And now if we just no-clip back onto the ship, so you'd swim, you wouldn't no-clip, you'd swim. And it says man overboard, so it's armed and man overboard. So what you do now is you deactivate the system, and the ship is back on the path. And what you could do at that point is you could reactivate it, but remember, if you enter inside, the ship will stop, and you'll have to go and deactivate it, so only deactivate it when you are no longer going to be on the deck. So that was a nifty little video. I think that kind of functionality will come into play with all the ships, especially with the fact that if you're playing single player, it really sucks to watch as your ship drives away without you. Thank you for watching. Thank you for all the support. Stay tuned for more videos, creations, all that good stuff. And as always, happy Stormworksing.